The world for 7-year-old Leo smelled of damp concrete and the faint sour tang of old cabbage that seemed permanently infused into the hallway carpet of their apartment building. It was a smell of things left too long, of dreams deferred and forgotten. He lived in a universe circumscribed by the peeling paint of their small living room and the constant dull rumble of the elevated train that rattled their window panes every 20 minutes, a shuddering reminder of a world that was always moving somewhere else, somewhere better. His mother, Sarah, was the quiet, warm center of this small, fragile world. She smelled of bleach from her cleaning job and the cheap floral soap she used, a scent that to Leo was the very essence of safety. Sarah was a woman sculpted from resilience and exhaustion. Her smile when it came felt brittle, like a leaf in late autumn, beautiful but on the verge of crumbling. She worked 2 jobs, a relentless cycle of scrubbing floors and serving coffee that left her with shadows under her eyes as deep and purple as a fresh bruise. The worst of it was that their landlord, a man named Mr. Thompson, was also her boss at the second job, a greasy spoon diner downtown. He held their lives in his soft, manicured hands, a fact he never let her forget. The rent was a hungry beast, always demanding more, and Mr. Thompson was its keeper. Leo understood this pressure not in words but in feelings. He felt it in the way his mother's shoulders tensed when the mail arrived, in the way she would stare out the window at the gray, indifferent city sky. He saw the quiet dignity she clung to, the way she carefully mended his worn-out jeans with thread that almost matched, the way she turned a can of soup and a heel of bread into a feast with the magic of her love. She was his everything, and he was hers. They were a tiny island in a vast, uncaring ocean, holding on to each other as the tide relentlessly rose. One Tuesday afternoon, the tide came crashing in. The air was thick and heavy, promising a storm that refused to break. Leo sat on the floor, drawing a knight in shining armor on a piece of scrap paper, a hero to slay the dragons he couldn't name, but felt lurking in the corners of their life. The knight had a fierce, kind face and a sword that glowed with power. A sharp, authoritative knock at the door made Leo jump, and the crayon snapped in his small hand. Everything stopped. The air grew thin. Sarah opened the door to reveal Mr. Thompson. He filled the doorway, a large man in a suit that was too tight, his smile a gleaming, predatory thing. He smelled of expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of stale cigar smoke. "Sarah, my dear," he said, his voice a slick, oily purr, "just came to discuss the schedule, and of course the rent." He glanced past her, his eyes sweeping over their meager apartment with a look of undisguised contempt. Across the street, almost unnoticed, a group of men sat at the rusted metal tables of a struggling sidewalk cafe. They were a stark contrast to the drabness of the neighborhood, a splash of black leather and chrome against faded brick. Their motorcycles were lined up at the curb like sleeping iron beasts, their engines silent but humming with latent power. Patches on their leather vests named them the Sentinel Knights. They were a fixture in this part of town, intimidating and remote, a tribe that operated by its own rules. Most people gave them a wide berth. Mr. Thompson stepped inside without being invited, his presence sucking the air from the room. "I'm afraid I have some bad news," he began, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Business is slow at the diner. I need you to cover an extra shift tonight, unpaid, of course, for the team." He said the word team as if it were a weapon. Sarah's back went rigid. "Mr. Thompson, I can't. I have Leo. I've already worked 10 hours today." His smile vanished, replaced by a cold flatness. "That's a shame. A real shame. Because the rent is due tomorrow, and I'm afraid I can't accept any late payments this month. It would be terrible if you and the boy had to find somewhere else to live." The threat was not veiled. It was laid bare on the threadbare rug between them, ugly and undeniable. It was a cruelty delivered with the casual disinterest of a man swatting a fly. This was his power, and he reveled in it. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, hot and stinging. She fought to keep them from falling, to maintain that last shred of dignity he was trying to strip from her. "That's not fair," she whispered, her voice trembling. Leo watched from the corner of the room, his drawing forgotten. The dragon was no longer on the paper. It was here, in their home, breathing fire and poison. He saw his mother, his brave, strong mother, begin to crumble. The sight broke something inside him. It was her breaking point. The endless days of work, the constant worry, the humiliation, it all crested in that single, terrible moment. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay," she breathed, the word of surrender. "Okay, Mr. Thompson." He smirked, a victor claiming his spoils. "I knew you'd see reason." As he turned to leave, his smugness filled the tiny apartment like a foul gas. But Leo did not see reason. He saw injustice. He saw his mother's pain. In that moment, the 7-year-old boy made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. He looked at the monster in the suit, and then his gaze shot across the street to the men in leather. They looked dangerous. They looked like the villains in stories. But his mother had always taught him that you couldn't judge a book by its cover, and right now, the man in the suit was the only monster he could see. With a cry that was part fear and part fury, Leo bolted. He scrambled past Mr. Thompson, who yelped in surprise and shot out the open door. He ran across the cracked pavement of the sidewalk, his small legs pumping, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He didn't slow, didn't hesitate. He ran straight towards the silent, watching bikers. He ran towards the biggest one, a man whose face was a road map of scars and whose arms were covered in intricate tattoos. The biker, whose name was John, watched the small boy approach with a steady, unreadable gaze. He had seen the whole exchange through the apartment's open door. He had seen the landlord's swagger and the woman's despair. He was the president of the Sentinel Knights, a veteran who had seen real monsters in dusty, faraway lands. He recognized the look in the boy's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen on the faces of people with nothing left to lose. Leo skidded to a stop directly in front of him, chest heaving. He had to crane his neck to look up at the towering figure. Tears streamed down his face, leaving clean tracks through the grime of the city. He didn't have a plan. He only had a desperate, impossible hope. He pointed a trembling finger back at his apartment. "Quote 10, he gasped. Then the words tumbled out, a plea from the deepest part of his soul. "Quote 11, he begged, his voice small but clear. "Quote 12. The other bikers fell silent. The clink of a coffee cup, the murmur of conversation. It all ceased. All eyes were on John and the small, trembling boy before him. Mr. Thompson stood frozen in the doorway of the apartment, a look of confused outrage on his face. He had expected tears and submission, not this bizarre act of defiance. John's eyes, which had seen so much violence and sorrow, softened. He looked from the boy to the weeping mother, then to the smug landlord. He saw the entire story laid out before him. It was a story he knew well, the strong preying on the weak. John made a decision. It was not a complicated one. The Sentinel Knights had a code, an unspoken set of rules they lived and died by. And the first rule, the most sacred one, was that they protected the innocent, especially children. He placed a large, calloused hand gently on Leo's shoulder. "Quote 13, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was surprisingly calm. Quote 14. He stood up, and as if moved by a single mind, the other 4 bikers at the table stood with him. They moved without a word, a silent, coordinated unit. They were not fast, but they moved with a weight and purpose that seemed to bend the air around them. They crossed the street, their heavy boots making a soft rhythmic crunch on the asphalt. Mr. Thompson's smug expression began to curdle into uncertainty, then into a flicker of genuine fear. The confrontation was not loud or violent. It was quiet and absolute. The bikers didn't surround Thompson. They simply formed a line, a living wall of leather and muscle between him and the door to Sarah's apartment. John stood in the center, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't threaten. He didn't yell. He just looked at Thompson, his gaze level and piercing. "I think your business here is concluded," John said. It was not a request. Thompson, puffed up with the arrogance of a man who had never been truly challenged, tried to bluster his way through. "Who in the hell do you think you are? This is my property. This is a private matter between me and my tenant." He jabbed a finger toward Sarah, who was now standing behind the bikers with Leo clinging to her leg. "You have no right to interfere. I'm calling the police." John's smile was a thin, dangerous line. "Go ahead," he said calmly. "Call them. While you're at it, you can explain to them the multiple fire code violations in this building, the faulty wiring in the hallway, the black mold I can smell from here. Or we could talk about labor laws. Demanding unpaid overtime under threat of eviction sounds an awful lot like extortion to me. He tilted his head. What do you think? One of the other bikers, a man they called Ghost because he was a whiz with technology, was already tapping away on his phone. His fingers flew across the screen. John, he said, not looking up. Our Mr. Thompson here has a history. 6 formal complaints filed with the city's housing authority in the last 2 years, all from tenants who were evicted shortly after. And get this, the diner he owns has 3 pending wage theft claims against it. Thompson's face went from ruddy to pale. His confidence, built on a foundation of bullying the powerless, evaporated under the calm, analytical assault. He saw that these were not the mindless thugs he had assumed them to be. They were organized, they were intelligent, and they were not intimidated by him in the slightest. His world, which had seemed so solid and under his control just moments before, was beginning to fracture. "This is slander! You have no proof!" he sputtered, his voice rising in pitch. He tried to push past John to get back into the building, perhaps to his own apartment to hide. But another biker, a mountain of a man named Bear, simply extended an arm, blocking his path. It was not a shove or a strike. It was an immovable object meeting a flailing, panicked force. Thompson stumbled back, his bluster completely gone, replaced by the raw, naked fear of a cornered rat. "We're getting proof," John said, his voice still unnervingly calm. He nodded to another member. "Cutter, make 2 calls. First to our lawyer, Martinez. Tell him we have a pro bono case for him. Landlord intimidation, illegal eviction practices, and wage theft. Then call Detective Miller at the 5th Precinct. He owes us a favor. Tell him we've gift-wrapped a real piece of work for him." He never took his eyes off Thompson. "You see, we believe in the system. We just like to make sure it works for the right people." The facade shattered. Thompson's authority, his societal standing, his carefully constructed image of a respectable businessman, it all dissolved into nothing. He was just a bully, stripped of his power, exposed for all to see. Other tenants, drawn by the commotion, began to peek out of their doors. Emboldened by the presence of the bikers, one elderly woman stepped out. "He did the same to me last month," she called out, her voice shaky but firm. "Threatened to evict me if I didn't pay for a plumbing repair that was his responsibility." Another man joined in, and then another. The dam of fear had broken. Within an hour, the street was a hive of activity. A police car arrived, not with flashing lights and sirens, but with a quiet professionalism that spoke of a pre-existing relationship. Detective Miller, a tired-looking man with an honest face, listened patiently as John laid out the situation. He took statements from Sarah and the other tenants. Ghost handed him a thumb drive with a neatly compiled file of Thompson's public records and the complaints he had found online. The evidence was overwhelming. As the police led a protesting, defeated Mr. Thompson to the squad car, a small crowd of tenants watched. For the first time, there was no fear in their eyes. There was relief. There was a sense of vindication. Sarah stood on her doorstep, holding Leo's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. She watched the man who had tormented her for so long being stripped of his power, and a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying began to lift from her soul. Her world was no longer shrinking, it was expanding. The possibility of a future, a real future, began to dawn. The bikers did not simply ride off into the sunset. That was not their way. Their intervention was not a single act of charity. It was an adoption. Sarah and Leo were now under the protection of the Sentinel Knights. That evening, they didn't eat canned soup. Bear arrived with 3 large pizzas, and Ghost brought a used laptop for Leo to do his schoolwork on. They sat on the floor of the small apartment, these huge, intimidating men, and listened as Leo excitedly told them about his drawing of the night. John just watched, a quiet smile playing on his lips. He saw the way Sarah was finally starting to relax, the way the brittle quality of her smile was softening into something genuine. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Thompson's crimes came to light. The biker's lawyer, Martinez, a sharp man with a passion for helping the underdog, filed a class-action lawsuit on behalf of all the tenants Thompson had exploited. The wage theft claims were investigated, revealing a systematic pattern of abuse at his diner. His public image was obliterated. His name became synonymous with greed and corruption in the local news. The wolf had been unmasked, and his sheep's clothing was in tatters. The Sentinel Knights orchestrated Sarah and Leo's new beginning. They found them a new apartment, a bright, clean two-bedroom in a safe building owned by a retired firefighter who was a friend of the club. They paid the first 3 months' rent, calling it an investment. They helped Sarah find a new job, not as a cleaner or a waitress, but as a prep cook in a high-end restaurant where her talent for cooking, long suppressed, was finally recognized and nurtured. She was not just surviving anymore, she was beginning to build a life. John became a constant, steady presence in Leo's life. He never tried to replace the father Leo never had, but he became something just as important. A mentor, a protector, a friend. He taught Leo how to catch a baseball, how to stand up for himself without throwing a punch, and how to fix a bicycle chain. He showed him that true strength wasn't about intimidation or power over others. It was about using your strength to lift others up. The bond between the scarred veteran and the small boy was forged in a moment of crisis but tempered into something strong and enduring like steel. A year passed. The seasons turned, washing the city clean and bringing it back to life again. The changes in Sarah and Leo were profound. Sarah was no longer a shadow of a woman. She had started her own small catering business on the side, her food gaining a reputation for its heart and flavor. The Sentinel Knights were her first and most loyal customers. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her laughter, once a rare and precious thing, was now frequent and full-bodied. She was a woman who had been seen, validated, and given a chance to reclaim her own strength. Leo was thriving. He was a happy, confident 8-year-old who excelled in school and had a circle of friends. He no longer drew knights to slay imaginary dragons. He drew motorcycles and pictures of his new, unconventional family. He wore a small, custom-made leather vest over his t-shirts, a gift from the club with a single patch on the back, a small shield with the initials "29" for Leo Knight. He was one of them. He was home. The smell of damp concrete and old cabbage had been replaced by the scent of baking bread and the clean metallic aroma of John's motorcycle polish. One bright Saturday afternoon, Sarah and Leo were at a community park for a barbecue hosted by the Sentinel Knights. The air was filled with the sizzle of burgers on the grill and the rumbling laughter of the bikers as they played with the children from the neighborhood. It was a scene of such peaceful, joyous normalcy that it almost brought tears to Sarah's eyes. These men, once feared and misunderstood by the community, were now its staunchest protectors, their intimidating exteriors a shield for the kindness within. Leo was playing near the swings when he saw it. A bigger boy, a few years older, was backing a smaller, tearful child against the slide, trying to take his toy truck. The smaller boy was crying, his pleas ignored. Other children and parents looked away, an all-too-common dance of not getting involved. But Leo didn't look away. He remembered the feeling of being small and helpless, of facing a monster that seemed too big to fight. He remembered his mother's tears. He walked over, his small vest squared on his shoulders. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood next to the crying child, placing himself between the boy and the bully. He wasn't big, he wasn't threatening, but his presence was solid, unwavering. He looked the bigger boy in the eye, his expression not of anger, but of simple, unshakable resolve. "Leave him alone," he said, his voice quiet but firm, echoing the calm authority he had learned from John. The bully, surprised by the unexpected intervention, faltered. He looked at Leo, then at the growing crowd of bikers who had noticed the small drama and were now watching with quiet approval. He saw that the small boy was not alone. Defeated not by force, but by solidarity, the bully mumbled an apology and backed away. Leo turned to the smaller child, helped him wipe his tears, and handed him back his truck. He had paid it forward, he had become the protector. From across the park, John watched the entire scene unfold. He didn't interfere. He didn't need to. He saw the lesson he had tried to teach Leo take root and blossom into a selfless act of courage. He felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost took his breath away. This was their legacy. Not in headlines or tales of glory, but in small, profound moments like this. In a mother's reclaimed smile. In a boy's newfound courage. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, The Sentinel Knights prepared to leave. They mounted their bikes, the chrome gleaming in the fading light. John settled onto his own machine, the leather creaking softly. Leo ran up and gave him a fierce hug around his leg. "Thanks, John," he said, his voice muffled against the thick denim. John reached down and ruffled his hair. "Any time, kid. You make us proud." As the engines roared to life, a symphony of controlled power that echoed through the quiet streets, Sarah stood watching, her heart full. She understood now. Heroes didn't always wear shining armor or fly through the sky. Sometimes they wore leather and rode on chrome, their hearts as loud and powerful as their engines. They were the unlikely angels who had answered a little boy's desperate prayer, not with magic, but with something far more real: loyalty, strength, and unwavering kindness. The Sentinel Knights rode off into the twilight, a line of dark silhouettes against the dying light, leaving behind a world they had made safer and a family they had made whole.